If you've ever been called the mature one growing up, it probably sounded like a compliment. Adults would say it with a kind of quiet approval. You're so responsible for your age. You're the easy one. You understand things better than other kids. And at the time, it may have felt like something to be proud of. But people who grew up as the mature one often carry patterns into adulthood that they don't immediately connect back to childhood. Patterns like always being the listener in conversations, feeling responsible for other people's emotions, struggling to ask for help even when things feel overwhelming. On the surface, these behaviors look like emotional strength, but psychologically, they often come from something deeper. Because in many cases, being the mature one didn't actually mean you were more emotionally developed. It meant you had to become emotionally responsible earlier than you were supposed to. Sometimes this happens quietly. Maybe you were the child who stayed calm when the adults around you were stressed. Maybe you noticed tension in the house and tried not to make things worse. You might have been the one who kept your feelings to yourself because someone else's feelings already filled the room. And over time, something subtle begins to happen in a child's mind. They start to believe their role is to manage the emotional atmosphere around them. Not in an obvious way, but in small behaviors. Paying close attention to people's moods, trying to keep the peace, avoiding conflict whenever possible. From the outside, this can look like emotional intelligence, and in many ways it is. Children who grow up in these environments often develop very high empathy. They learn to read subtle emotional signals. They can sense tension before anyone says a word. But there's another side to this pattern. When a child becomes emotionally responsible too early, they often learn that their own needs should come second. Not because someone directly told them that, but because the environment quietly reinforced it. If a parent was overwhelmed, the child stayed quiet. If someone was upset, the child tried to comfort them. If conflict appeared, the child tried to smooth it over. Over time, this creates a deep identity pattern, being the stable one, the calm one, the understanding one, the one who handles things. And this identity can follow people far into adulthood. You might notice it in small moments, like when someone asks how you're doing, and your first instinct is to say, "I'm fine," even if you're not. Or when a friend is struggling, and somehow you become the emotional support system without even thinking about it. Or when you hesitate to talk about your own problems because it feels uncomfortable to place that weight on someone else. None of these behaviors feels dramatic. In fact, they often feel normal, but they reflect a deeper psychological habit that began years earlier, a habit of carrying emotional responsibility. And here's where it gets interesting. Most people assume the mature child grows up to be emotionally strong simply because of personality, but the real reason often has more to do with adaptation. Children are incredibly good at adjusting to their environment. If the environment needs calmness, they become calm. If the environment needs understanding, they become understanding. If the environment needs emotional stability, they learn to provide it. This process is sometimes called parentification. Not always in an obvious sense. Sometimes it means taking care of emotional responsibilities, listening to adult problems, comforting someone who is struggling, acting older than your age because the situation quietly required it. And when that role continues long enough, the child begins to internalize it as part of who they are. They don't just act mature, they become the mature ones. But this identity has hidden consequences. One of them is difficulty asking for help, not because the person believes they don't deserve help, but because their mind is more familiar with being the helper. When someone spends years being the stable one, receiving support can feel strangely unfamiliar, sometimes even uncomfortable. Another pattern that often appears is emotional self-containment. People who were the mature children tend to process a lot internally. They think deeply about their feelings. They analyze situations. They try to understand everyone's perspective,
but they may not always express those emotions outwardly, not because they don't feel them,
but because somewhere in the background of their mind, there's a quiet belief that they should be the strong one. And strength, in their experience, meant staying composed. But the story doesn't end there, because the same childhood patterns that created emotional responsibility also created something else: high empathy. People who grew up being the mature ones often have an unusually strong ability to understand others. They can notice shifts in tone, changes in body language, unspoken tension in a room. This ability developed early because it had to. It was a way of navigating an emotional environment, and over time it became second nature. But empathy at that level can also come with emotional weight. When you naturally understand what others are feeling, it becomes harder to ignore it. You might absorb other people's stress. You might feel responsible for fixing things. You might stay quiet in situations where speaking up feels like it would create conflict. And none of this usually feels like a conscious decision. It feels like instinct. That instinct was built slowly over years of learning how to keep emotional balance in the spaces around you. And once that identity forms, it tends to stay. The reliable one, the understanding one, the mature one. But when people begin to reflect on this pattern, they often notice something surprising. Their maturity didn't come from being older, it came from adapting earlier. Adapting to emotional complexity before most children have to think about it. And once you see that pattern clearly, a lot of small behaviors suddenly make sense. Why do you tend to handle things on your own? Why do you sometimes hesitate to share what you're going through? Why people often turn to you when they need someone to talk to? It was never random. It was a role you learned. A role that slowly shaped how you relate to the world and to the people around you. And recognizing that pattern doesn't erase it, but it changes how you understand it. Being the mature one was never just about personality. It was about adaptation, an early awareness of emotions, an early sense of responsibility. And once you see that, you begin to understand something deeper about yourself. The calmness, the empathy, the quiet strength. They didn't appear out of nowhere. They were built. And sometimes they were built earlier than they should have been. Once you see that, you can't really unsee it. It becomes another piece of the story that explains how certain people learn to move through the world. And for many of them, the mature child never completely disappears. They simply grow up and carry that quiet awareness with them. If this explains something you've noticed about yourself, there's always more beneath the surface. Because understanding your patterns is often the first moment you realize they were never random. They were part of the story all along.